HOA built 79 vacation cabins on my lake. I unleashed chaos and ruined their dream. Overnight, the construction crews started early. I watched as they moved in, each cabin creeping closer to my lake, but they didn't know what I had planned. I had lived peacefully here for years, until they decided to destroy it. I had one chance to stop them, and I wasn't going to let it slip away. What I did next, no one could have predicted. The dream they built became a nightmare. You won't believe how it ended. Hey everyone, welcome back to HOA Secrets Uncovered. I'm Mark, and today's story is one that's close to my heart. I live right by a beautiful lake, surrounded by suburban tranquility, until the HOA decided to wreck it. I've been through some wild HOA battles, but this was different. They thought they could bulldoze over my peace. Well, they didn't know who they were messing with. Let me take you through the story. The last time I saw the HOA president smile at me, I should have known something was off. It wasn't the kind of smile that makes you feel warm inside. No, it was cold, calculated, like she was sizing me up, figuring out how to crush me. I'd been living by this lake for years, enjoying the peace, the quiet, but all of that changed when she came into power. It started with a simple meeting invitation. Nothing too strange. The HOA meetings were always the same, a bunch of uptight people talking about lawn heights and mailbox colors. But this time felt different. When I walked into that room, there was something in the air. A tension. A quiet sense of something big about to happen. She stood at the front, smiling at everyone, but her eyes, they were sharp. It was like she could see through me, like she knew I was about to become the target of something much bigger than I ever expected. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice too sweet, almost sickly. "We have some exciting developments for this neighborhood, for the lake." My ears perked up. The lake was everything to me. I didn't want anyone messing with it. But as she spoke, I could feel the weight of her words. "We're planning to build 79 vacation cabins along the shoreline," she announced with a smile that felt like a dagger in my gut. 79 cabins. On my lake. My peaceful lake. Now about to be swarmed with strangers and construction noise. My heart sank. I could hear the murmurs around the room, but my thoughts were racing. What was going on? Why 79 cabins? How could they just take something so important to me and ruin it like that? I didn't speak up at first. I stayed quiet, but inside I was boiling. I didn't know it yet, but this would be the beginning of something much bigger. As the meeting continued, she went on and on, talking about the benefits of the development, how it would boost property values, how it would bring new life to the area. But I wasn't buying it. It was all about control, all about power. She wasn't just after the lake. She was after more. I could feel it in the way she spoke, in the way she held herself, like she thought she was untouchable. I remember staring at her, watching her smile widen. It didn't make me feel reassured. It made me feel like I was about to lose everything. I waited for the meeting to end. I couldn't focus on the rest of the conversation. All I could think about was that lake, and how my peaceful life was being ripped away. I knew I had to act fast. After the meeting, I stood up to leave, but as I turned to walk out, she was standing in front of me, blocking my path. Her smile didn't fade. "I'm glad you could join us," she said, still grinning. But again, her eyes, they didn't match the smile. They were cold, calculating, like she knew what was coming next. And it wasn't good for me. I tried to walk past her, but she stepped closer, like she was controlling the space around me. "I've heard some things about you," she said, lowering her voice so only I could hear. Don't think you can stand in the way of progress." I froze. What did she mean by that? What did she know about me? I had never caused trouble before. I kept to myself. But somehow, she knew. I stared back at her, trying to keep my composure. "Progress?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She smirked. "Oh, don't worry. You'll see soon enough. The cabins will be built, whether you like it or not." Her tone was so matter-of-fact, like she had already won, like there was no point in resisting. I walked away, my mind racing. What was I going to do? The idea of those 79 cabins was unbearable. How could they just build on the lake, on my lake? I couldn't let it happen. I wouldn't. But I knew something already. This wasn't just about the lake anymore. This was about power, and I had to take it back. If I didn't, I'd be nothing more than a pawn in her game. I went home that night, staring out at the lake. I didn't feel calm anymore. I felt like I was watching a storm brewing on the horizon. Something was coming, and I wasn't going to let it destroy everything I had worked for. I spent the next few days thinking. I needed a plan, something that would stop them before they even started. But how? I had to figure out the weak link, the one thing that could tear her dream apart. I couldn't do it alone. But then again, maybe I didn't need to. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Would you fight for what's yours? Or would you just let them take it all? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear your thoughts before we move on to the next part of the story. Trust me, this isn't even the worst part yet. I couldn't sleep that night. Not a single minute. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those 79 vacation cabins, one by one, rising along the shore. It wasn't just construction to me. It was an invasion. The lake had been my sanctuary, my escape. And now, it was about to be stolen away by a bunch of strangers. As the days passed, I kept thinking about that cold smile of the HOA president. Her eyes were still haunting me. But I wasn't about to let her win, not without a fight. I started paying closer attention to the construction plans. They had permits. They had the green light from the city. It all seemed so official, so irreversible. But I knew I had to find a way to stop them before it was too late. I spent hours researching. How could I legally block this development? Could I get the community to rise up with me? I wasn't alone in this neighborhood, but most people didn't seem to care. They were too busy with their own lives, their own worries. But I wasn't going to give up. I sat down by the lake the next morning, watching the sunlight dance on the water. It was so peaceful, but not for long. I could feel the storm coming, and I had to be ready. That's when I realized something. The HOA president didn't just want the lake for herself. She wanted to control everything. She wasn't going to stop at the cabins. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how dangerous she was. She was playing a long game, and I was just a pawn in it. I had to think bigger. I had to outsmart her before it was too late. So, I did what I do best. I started digging. I found out about the development project's funding. It wasn't all as smooth as they made it seem. The permits they had were shaky. The contractors they hired? They had a history of cutting corners. That's when I realized maybe I wasn't as powerless as I thought. I wasn't about to let a few cabins ruin everything I had worked for. But how could I turn this around? How could I use their own game against them? The answer came to me in a flash. I would comply with every single rule they had set. But I would do it in a way that would make their perfect little world crumble. I started by following the rules, and I mean every single one of them. The tiniest violations were like cracks in their foundation. I knew that the HOA was always watching, and they would pounce on any chance to slap a fine on someone who didn't follow the rules. But what they didn't know was, I wasn't just following the rules for the sake of being obedient. I was setting them up. I was playing them at their own game. And every time they fined me, every time they sent me a nasty letter, I got closer to my goal. It wasn't long before the HOA started sending threats. Legal letters arrived in the mail, big, bold letters warning me to comply or face consequences. But I didn't back down. I just smiled and followed their orders, one rule at a time, until I was buried in fines and paperwork. But there was something they didn't account for. The more they pushed me, the more I learned about them. Their own rules were full of loopholes, and I wasn't about to let them get away with it. I started researching the HOA's history, and that's when I found something that made my blood run cold. The HOA president wasn't just a power-hungry control freak. She had a history of shady dealings. She had used the HOA to push through her own personal agenda, and the more I dug, the more I uncovered. I found out that she had been behind several other controversial projects in the neighborhood. Each one had left a trail of complaints, lawsuits, and angry residents. But somehow, she always came out on top. She had been manipulating the system for years. But this time, it was different. This time, I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I had to expose her. But how? I kept pushing forward, knowing that the lake was my only chance. If I could get enough people on my side, maybe we could stop this. But how could I get the neighborhood to care? How could I make them see what was really happening? It wasn't just about 79 vacation cabins anymore. It was about the power she had over all of us. She had been playing us all, and I was about to turn the tables. I started talking to neighbors quietly. I wasn't going to make a big scene. I knew if I went public too soon, the HOA would shut me down. I had to build support, one conversation at a time. But as I spoke to more people, I realized something. Most of them didn't care. They didn't think it was a big deal. A few new cabins? Big deal, right? It wasn't until I showed them the impact it would have on the lake, on their own homes, that they started to listen. But not everyone was convinced. Some people still thought I was overreacting. Some thought I was just making trouble. But I couldn't stop now. I had to keep going. For the lake. For my home. For everyone who didn't realize they were about to lose everything. And then, something unexpected happened. The HOA president made a move. A bold one. She sent a letter to all the residents, informing them that the cabins would be starting construction immediately. She promised them that everything would be better once the cabins were done. But that wasn't the shocking part. No. The real shock came when she attached a special clause to her letter. It was something I wasn't expecting. A hidden agenda. I had done everything right. I followed the rules, kept my mouth shut, played my cards carefully. But when that letter arrived from the HOA, it was like the final straw. I could feel my heart pounding as I tore open the envelope, hoping for some good news. But there was nothing good in it. It was worse than I imagined. The HOA president had made her move, and it was far more than just starting construction on those 79 cabins. She had arranged a special community enhancement fee, a fee that would affect every homeowner. It was buried in the fine print, a sneaky addition to their already ridiculous plans. The fee was mandatory, and it was enormous. Each homeowner would have to pay it in order to support the new development and improve infrastructure. The catch? If you didn't pay, you could face legal action from the HOA. I couldn't believe it. They were forcing us to pay for something we didn't want. And even worse, this was the HOA president's way of ensuring she'd get her way. She wasn't just after the lake. She was after control over every single person in this neighborhood. I threw the letter on the table. My mind raced with thoughts of what to do next. This wasn't just about the lake anymore. It was about our entire way of life. How could she do this to all of us? How could the HOA have this much power over us? I couldn't let this stand. I had already started making enemies with the HOA president. But now, it was personal. I was going to fight back. But how? I couldn't just ignore it. This wasn't the time to stay quiet. I had to figure out my next move. And fast. The thing about fighting the HOA is, they're always one step ahead. They know how to push your buttons, how to make you feel powerless, and they've been doing it for years. But what if we could? I could feel the tension rising. What was she going to do now? Would she ignore it? Would she retaliate? Or was she going to come after me personally? Days passed, and I waited for her response. The HOA board was silent, but I knew they were watching. I could feel the weight of their eyes on me, but still, nothing came. Until one day, a letter arrived. A thick envelope marked urgent. I opened it cautiously, knowing this could be the turning point. Inside was a notice, a summons. The HOA was taking me to court. I had crossed the line, and they were coming after me. I couldn't help but laugh. They thought they could intimidate me into silence. But this was far from over. Now, they had made it personal, and once you make it personal, there's no turning back. I sat back and let the laughter fade. What had started as a simple fight for the lake was now a full-scale war. But the question lingered in my mind. What would happen next? Would I fold under the pressure? Or would I rise up and take control of the situation? I should have seen it coming. The moment I received that summons, I knew things were about to get ugly. But what the HOA president didn't know was that I was playing her game too. She thought I was just another homeowner who would roll over and take it. She thought I'd panic, back down. But she couldn't have been more wrong. When the letter arrived, I didn't let it rattle me. Instead, I smiled, because I knew something she didn't. I had been preparing for this moment. I had been following every rule they set in place, every rule with meticulous care. And now, it was all coming together. The HOA had always prided itself on control. Every little thing was under scrutiny. How high your grass grew, whether your trash cans were neatly tucked away, if your mailbox was exactly 4 feet high. Petty stuff. But it was their power, and they used it to crush anyone who dared to step out of line. But what they never expected was that someone could use their own system against them. I'd been thinking about this for days, looking for a way to strike back. I couldn't just fight them head on. I had to be smarter than that. So, I did what no one thought to do. I followed every single rule they enforced to the letter, and I made sure to document everything. You see, the HOA wasn't just controlling our properties. They were controlling our lives. But I had a plan. Every rule, every regulation, every clause, they were all like weapons waiting to be used. And now, I was going to turn those weapons on them. I started with the simplest things. I made sure my lawn was perfectly manicured, the bushes trimmed, the mailbox exactly 4 feet high. I took pictures of everything. Every corner of my property was in perfect compliance. And I wasn't just doing it for me. I started talking to my neighbors. Slowly at first, just here and there. But I planted the seed. "Do you know what they'll fine you for?" I'd ask. "The tiniest things, like the color of your house or the angle of your driveway." And they'd laugh. But they started paying attention. Soon, I had an army of neighbors behind me, all following the rules. But not for the reasons they thought. We weren't just playing nice anymore. We were setting the stage for something bigger. The HOA president had no idea what was coming. She thought she was winning, playing her hand well. She thought she could push us all around, one fine at a time. But as the weeks went by, I could see the cracks beginning to show. More and more people were compliant. More lawns were pristine. More mailboxes stood exactly 4 feet tall. It wasn't just me, it was all of us, quietly working together. And the HOA? They were drowning in their own rules. The fines started piling up for the HOA. They had no idea what was happening. They had no idea that the very system they used to control us was now their undoing. Because each fine they handed out only made us stronger. Each ridiculous rule became another reason to document their failure. And then came the twist. The HOA president tried to force another emergency meeting. She called it necessary for the future of the community. But everyone knew it was a desperate move. She could see what was happening. She could feel the pressure building. The more people complied, the more she lost control. I knew this was my moment. So I showed up to that meeting. With every single document, every photograph, every receipt I had been collecting for weeks. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for all of us. And I was going to make sure they knew it. As soon as the meeting began, I stood up, my documents in hand, and made my move. "I've been following your rules to the letter," I said, voice steady, calm. Every lawn, every mailbox, every tiny regulation. The room went silent. The HOA president shot me a glance, her eyes narrowing. "I've documented it all, and I've got the fines to prove it." The tension in the room was thick, like everyone was holding their breath. Then I dropped the bombshell. "But here's the thing." I paused, letting the silence sink in. "You've been fining me for things that are, well, absurd. But you've been doing the same to everyone else, too. And now, I've got a whole stack of complaints from the very people you've been trying to control." The HOA president's smile faltered. I could see the panic creeping into her eyes. But I wasn't done. I leaned in and let the final words hit like a slap. "I think it's time we show the community just how much you've been taking from all of us." The room erupted into murmurs. The HOA president tried to regain control, but it was too late. I had turned their system into a weapon of their own destruction. For the first time, I could see the cracks in her armor, and I knew that I had her right where I wanted her. But I still had one question lingering. Would she try to crush us all with an iron fist? Or would she finally see the power of the people? What do you think she'll do next? I could hear my heart pounding in my ears as I left that meeting. The room had been charged with tension, the HOA president's icy glare still burning in my mind. She hadn't expected the fight I'd put up. She hadn't expected this. But that wasn't the end of it. The wheels were already in motion, and I wasn't about to let her regain control. In fact, I knew it was time to push even harder, because there was one final piece to the puzzle, one move that would end everything, and I was ready to make it. But before we get to that, let me backtrack a little. The HOA had underestimated one very important thing. The lake wasn't just property to me. It was part of me. I had watched over it for years, and I knew it better than anyone else. I knew the dam that held its waters back, the intricate system of channels and locks. And the thing about dams? They don't stay shut forever. I had always respected the lake's boundaries, its quiet, calm surface. But now the HOA was pushing my patience, pushing me to the brink, and as I sat in my living room staring out at the water, I realized something. I had been playing nice for too long. It was time for the HOA to feel the consequences of their actions. My actions. I made a call. Not to any lawyer, not to any activist, but to someone who knew this lake like the back of their hand. A local engineer. Someone who had worked on the dam before. Someone who understood exactly what it took to release the floodgates. It was risky. It was dangerous. But it was also perfect. The plan was simple. I was going to open the dam. Not all at once, not in a crazy rush, but just enough to send a clear message. I needed to break their dream, to ruin their perfect little project, and nothing said destruction quite like the force of an unstoppable flood. It wasn't just about flooding their cabins. It was about showing them the power of nature, the same power they had tried to control, the same power they had underestimated. So, that night, I prepared. I gathered all my things, my gear, my tools. I set everything up, getting everything ready. The engineer had given me clear instructions, and I followed them to the letter. I couldn't afford to make any mistakes. One wrong move, and the damage could be much worse than I intended. As I stood by the dam, the moonlight reflecting off the water, a strange calm settled over me. I had been planning this for days, and now the time had come. I reached for the lever, my hand trembling for just a moment before I steadied myself. With one sharp movement, I pulled it. The sound of the mechanism shifting echoed in the stillness of the night. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the water began to rise. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. But as I stood there, watching, I knew that in just a few minutes, the dam would be full open, and the lake would overflow. The cabins they'd built, the structures they had put up, thinking they were untouchable, would soon be gone. I stood watching the water slowly creeping towards the cabins. It wasn't just the cabins that were about to be flooded. It was the idea that the HOA could do whatever they wanted without consequences. It was about the people who had been so easily manipulated, their lives uprooted by the force of greed. And now the tables were turning. The water reached the base of the cabins. I felt a twisted satisfaction in watching it happen. Each inch of water that rose was another inch of control slipping out of their hands. The construction workers who had worked so tirelessly to build those cabins, what would they think when they arrived the next morning? The HOA president, who had thought she was unstoppable, what would she do when she saw the damage? Would she finally understand that nature and justice can't be controlled? But there was still one more thing I had to do. I wasn't going to let this be a small, petty victory. I wasn't just going to let the floodwaters speak for themselves. I had a message to send, and I was going to make sure it was heard. So, I drove to the HOA headquarters, the rain starting to pour as I sped down the road. I wasn't afraid anymore. I had seen what I could do when I took control. Now, it was time to take the final step. I marched into that building with a purpose, each footstep echoing in the silent hall. I walked straight up to the president's office, knocked once, and pushed open the door. She was sitting behind her desk, her usual smile replaced with a look of surprise as she saw me. Her eyes darted to the window where the storm was picking up outside. She knew. She must have known. But I wasn't here to talk about the weather. I wasn't here to talk at all. I pulled out my phone and showed her the footage of the dam breaking, the water rising. "Your dream is over," I said, my voice calm, almost detached. She stood up, her face going pale. "This isn't what you think," she started, but I cut her off. "I think you're about to lose everything," I said, and I left the room. As I walked back to my car, I didn't feel a sense of triumph. I didn't feel relief. What I felt was the calm after the storm. The real fight had just begun. But I had one question for you. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Would you have opened the dam? Or would you have taken a different path? The morning after the flood, I woke up to the sound of sirens. It wasn't the kind of sound that usually started my day, but I couldn't say I was surprised. What I had done was now out in the open. The water that had poured into the cabins was the least of my worries. What I was really worried about now was how the HOA was going to respond, and how far they were willing to go to make sure I paid for this. I grabbed my phone and opened the news app. It was everywhere. Pictures of the flooded vacation cabins, the water spilling over the foundation. The headline read, "Suburban Lake Development Destroyed Overnight in Mysterious Flood." They were already spinning the story, framing it as an act of nature, something no one could have foreseen. But the truth? The truth was much uglier. I was the one who caused it, and I wasn't going to hide from it. I didn't bother getting dressed for the day. I knew the HOA would be showing up at my door soon with their lawyers, their threats, their ridiculous claims. But I wasn't afraid. I had already taken control. At around noon, I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, a couple of suited men stood there, holding a stack of papers. One of them stepped forward. "We're representing the HOA," he said, as if I didn't already know. He handed me the papers, a cease and desist order, a demand for compensation, and a legal notice. I didn't even bother looking at it. I already knew what it said. They were trying to scare me into backing down, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. I threw the papers on the table and sat down. The lawyer glanced at the papers in my hand and then at me. "You do realize the consequences of what you've done, don't you?" he asked, his voice flat, calm, as if he were reading from a script. I smiled. "Of course. But I'm more concerned about what happens next," I said, leaning back in my chair. The lawyer's eyes narrowed. "We'll take this to court if we have to," he said, his tone serious. "You've crossed a line." "I know," I said, almost enjoying the tension in the air. I didn't care about the threat of court. The battle had already started, and now I was fully committed to it. "I'm not going anywhere," I added. The lawyer left, but his words stuck with me. "They'll come after you," he'd said. It wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. And they weren't going to let me get away with it. Later that day, the HOA president called. Her voice was strained, not the calm, confident tone she usually used. "I'm giving you one last chance to settle this quietly," she said, barely keeping her composure. "You've made a mistake, a big one, and if you don't agree to pay for the damages, I will make sure you regret it." I leaned back in my chair, listening to her words carefully. She sounded desperate, like she was grasping at straws. But I wasn't about to back down. "If you want to take me to court, then go ahead," I said, my voice calm. "Maybe we'll finally get to see how much power the HOA really has." Her silence spoke volumes. She wasn't expecting this. I wasn't backing down. That night, I sat by the lake again, the water eerily still under the moonlight. The aftermath of my actions was setting in. I had turned the HOA's world upside down, and now they were scrambling. I had disrupted their dream, but now they were coming after me with everything they had. I knew the flood was just the beginning. I wasn't just fighting for the lake anymore. I was fighting for my life, for my home, for everyone who had been manipulated by the HOA for so long. They thought they were untouchable. But I was about to show them what happens when you push someone too far. The next morning, I received a call from my lawyer. "Things are escalating," he said, sounding worried. "The HOA has already started filing papers, and they're pushing hard for legal action." It wasn't a surprise. I knew it wasn't enough to just expose the HOA. We needed to hit them where it hurt, their pocketbook, and that's when the final piece of the plan fell into place. I had already been in touch with a lawyer who specialized in housing rights. He had been working with us on the side, helping us navigate the legal side of things. But now it was time for the big move. We filed a class action lawsuit against the HOA, not just for the damage to the lake, but for all the pain they had caused the entire neighborhood, the outrageous fines, the unnecessary rules, the way they had bullied everyone into submission. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. When the lawsuit was filed, the HOA president tried to dismiss it. She thought it was just another empty threat, just another smear campaign. But this time, it wasn't going away. The media picked it up. The local news stations were all over it, and before long, the story spread beyond our little neighborhood. People across the state were starting to question how many HOAs were doing the same thing, pushing people around, taking away their rights just to line their pockets. And then came the bombshell. The HOA president's shady past came to light. As the media dug deeper, they found evidence of her personal involvement in a string of other controversial projects, all with her own foul, financial gain at the center. Suddenly, she wasn't just a power-hungry president anymore. She was a criminal. The floodgates had opened. The HOA board members scrambled to cover their tracks, but it was too late. People were rallying behind us, calling for transparency, demanding that the HOA be held accountable for the years of abuse. And just like that, the HOA began to crumble. Board members resigned, the president was removed, the fines were canceled, and for the first time in years, the neighborhood felt like it could breathe again. But the best part? The lake was ours again, not just mine, but all of ours. The cabins? Gone. The construction crews were forced to pull out, their dreams of development washed away like the floodwaters that had once risen to destroy them. I sat on the dock by the lake, watching the water shimmer in the sunlight. It felt like a new beginning, a fresh start. For me, for my neighbors, for everyone who had been taken advantage of by the HOA. I had fought for something bigger than just myself. I had fought for the community, and in the end, we won. But as I sat there, I couldn't help but ask myself, would the HOA ever learn from this? Would they change, or would they rise from the ashes more powerful than ever? What's next for the people who think they can control others without consequence? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Because this isn't just the end of one fight. It's the beginning of something much bigger.